Hello, in this video I'm gonna share not one but two slightly unconventional techniques to create funky glitched out bass lines like this. And shuffling drum breaks like this. We'll also look at how to incorporate these kinds of sequences into a full track, and I'll give you a few mixing tips to make them sound more three-dimensional and alive. As always, you can grab all the stems from this video along with a bunch of bonus sounds over on my Patreon. And that's also where you'll find full track breakdown videos where I dive deep into how I create, mix and master my own music. So let's hit that subscribe button and jump right into Ableton Live. The first thing we'll do is drag in some shuffly drums. And then a funky bass line. Now, in order to get that fragmented, chopped up kind of feel, we're gonna need a bunch of different bass sounds that contrast with one another and have distinctly different textures and tones. Since our bass line is made up of a lot of short notes, it's best to use sounds with a fast attack here. This Carrier Sky preset sounds nice and crispy, so let's load it up and copy over the bass MIDI clip. It's always a good idea nudging the notes an octave up or down to find the sweet spot where the low end really hits. This bass sound seems to sit perfectly as is, so let's leave it at that and keep digging for a third layer. At this point, I think a bass guitar tone would contrast really nicely with the other two more synthetic kind of sounds. Let's grab this electric bass sound and check the octave. Yeah, we're definitely gonna need to pitch this one up an octave. Alright, I'm just gonna keep digging here and add a few more bass patches that I like. How many you use is totally up to you, but I'd say you'd need at least around 8 to 10 for an optimal glitchy kind of result. Cool, I ended up going with 8 sounds, all with pretty different textures and timbres, so let's take a listen and see what we've got here. This fourth one has quite some resonance to the filter envelope. A pretty distorted one here. Kinda Daft Punky sync sound. A pretty Moog-y sounding one. And on this last wobbly patch, I extended some of the notes and deleted shorter ones to let it fully develop. Alright, now that we've got our bass patches in place, let's get to the fun part. There are basically two techniques I like to use for creating these fragmented bass lines. One using follow actions and another one using take lanes. Now in both cases, we're gonna need to turn our MIDI tracks into audio clips, so let's start by doing that. I'm also gonna normalize each clip so we're hitting full volume without pushing the meters into the red. After converting all the bass channels, we'll group everything together into a new bass collection track and move all the audio clips in there. Alright, we've got a nice stack of bass sounds here, so let's clean things up by deleting the empty bass channels. Then we're gonna shift select all of our bass audio clips and head over to the highly overlooked Follow Actions tab, which is where the magic's gonna happen. Now, follow actions are super powerful and they let you automate what happens after a clip finishes playing. From the little drop-down menu here on the left, we can choose exactly what happens after the clip plays. You can have it trigger the previous or the next clip, make it jump to a specific one, and much more. For this technique, however, we're gonna select Other, which makes Live trigger any other random clip except for itself. You could potentially also set a second follow action from the drop-down menu next to it, and then use a probability slider to control how likely each action is to happen. Now in our case, we're going to use just one follow action, so we're going to set the probability slider all the way to 100% on the left. Now in linked mode, the follow action is tied to the clip's length, so the next one will be triggered when the clip finishes playing in its entirety. In unlinked mode, however, it's independent of the clip length, and you can set it to trigger after any amount of time by defining the number of beats or bars yourself. Now for this technique, I found that triggering a new clip every 2 beats works best, but feel free to play around with the values until you find something that fits your sound. The last thing we'll do is enable legato mode, which will make sure the newly triggered clip continues playing back from the position where the previous one left off, instead of starting from the beginning again. Cool, so now if we hit play on any of these clips, a random clip will be automatically triggered every 2 beats, and it'll keep on playing the bass line right from where the previous one left off. Let's listen. And as you can hear, this creates a pretty tight, glitchy bass sequence that constantly evolves and never repeats itself. The easiest way to bring this into a song is to feed the sequence into a new audio channel and record it for a number of bars. In this case, I added a glue compressor before recording to even out the dynamics of the different bass sounds. Once it's recorded, simply drag that audio into arrangement view, place it over your drums, and start rearranging the sections you like best into a loop. Now, one big tip here before we head over to the next technique is to try to repeat certain sections every bar or two and switch up the parts in between in order to make the loop feel a bit more intentional and less random. So let's copy over the first beat of bars 1 and 2 to the second half of the loop to make it sound a bit more organized. And then I'll also copy over the last beat of the second bar. Let's listen to it again. Alright, now let's look at another way to get a similar effect, this time using take lanes. Take lanes are usually used for comping or combining multiple recordings into one seamless take, but in this case we'll use them creatively to blend and switch between the different bass sounds. First, we'll right-click on the bass collection track that holds all of our bass clips and choose Insert Take Lane. Then we'll simply copy over the first bass loop and paste it into this take lane. As you can see, I've renamed each audio clip to match the name of its bass patch, which will make things much easier once we start comping, so we can immediately see which sound each take lane holds. Now we'll just insert more take lanes until every bass loop has its own dedicated lane. Alright, and now for the fun part. If we press B on the keyboard, which is the shortcut for the draw tool, we can simply highlight sections from each take lane and combine them into one composite audio loop. And you'll see the results appear right up here in the main track lane of this channel. Now let's duplicate these 2 bars and make a few small tweaks to keep it interesting. And then as a final step, I'm just gonna manually lower the volume of some of the chops to balance the loop out. So in the end, both approaches have their pros and cons. It really just depends on whether you prefer a more hands-on or a more generative workflow. Now at this point, I want to share a few mixing tips that can make a big difference when using this kind of bass sequence in a full track. First off, I'm gonna balance out the low end and high end separately using a multi-band compressor. My go-to here is FabFilter's Pro MB because it's super visual and easy to use, but any multi-band compressor will do the job here. For the low end, I'll create a band up to around 100 Hz, so we're only catching the deepest subs. I'm gonna raise the gain a bit and set the threshold so that it compresses back down to 0 whenever the bass gets too heavy, which will keep this up nice and consistent. Then I'll do the same thing to the high end, creating a band from around 5K and up, giving it a gentle boost while compressing back to 0. This will add some clarity and sparkle without getting too harsh. The next move I'm going to show you is a matter of taste, but I personally really like these kind of bass sequences to not sound too dry. If we add a bit of depth and dimension, this will help fill in those tiny gaps in between the different chops. The key here is to use a very short room reverb rather than drowning everything in a long reverb tail. So to do this, I'm going to load up an audio effect track and drop in this Anything to Room preset. Then I'll tweak the settings until the reverb feels as short as possible while still giving that nice compact room vibe. The size and decay parameters are really crucial here. Let's also add a touch more high-end for some extra crispiness. I'm also gonna cut the subs from the reverb signal so it doesn't interfere with the low end of the dry bass. Alright, now let's compare the dry version to the roomy loop and hear the difference. Even though it's barely noticeable at first, it really makes the bass sound much more three-dimensional. Especially this first chop. So again, this is a matter of taste, but I've always felt like these types of mixing moves can really turn a track from something flat into a song that feels three-dimensional and alive. Cool, now let's try applying the same technique to a bunch of classic amen breaks. I've dropped a few different breaks onto an audio track and set up the same follow actions as before. To make them sound a bit more cohesive, I added a glue compressor and used a drum bus to slightly shorten the sustain of the hits. I also threw in this Effects Motions plugin, which I'll turn on and off while recording to add some extra wonky movement. So let's run it and fine-tune the effects. This limiter at the end of the chain here will keep the meters green and make us look like real professionals who know what they're doing. I'll turn on this glitch plugin for a bar or two just to add some extra variation to the loop. Alright, now on the second channel I'm grabbing the audio from the breaks track, so let's hit record and see what we get. By the way, you will find a bunch of these break sequences plus the full stems from this video in the sample pack that comes with this tutorial on Patreon. Now, to put this break sequence into action, I've created a simple drum and bass drum pattern that will act as some kind of anchor for the breaks. Then I chopped up the most interesting parts of the break sequence we recorded and placed them over that beat, making sure a few chops repeat here and there so it feels a bit more structured. Finally, I sidechained the breaks to both the kick and the snare just to carve out some space and keep everything sitting nicely together in the dense layer of drum breaks. And then just like with the bass sequence, I added some room reverb in parallel. And that's it for this video. I hope it gave you some fresh ideas for creating these cool fragmented funky sequences. You can obviously use the same technique on melody, synths, or even vocal chops for some really cool, unique, glitchy textures. Now, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!